This week we got Venus, the planet of love, money, relationships, justice, and the like, making its way into the fire sign of Aries. And then a couple of days later, we get Pluto, the planet of the underworld, retrograding in the collective sign of Aquarius. And so this is a week in which we're continue on this theme of, do we know what we're hungry for and what'll satiate it? Because now it is time to not just dream, but bring those dreams into reality. So we need to wash our heads, but this time not with water, but with fire. All right, let's get into it for the astrological forecast for the week of April 30th through May 6th with Yappin with the Stars. So welcome back to Yappin with the Stars, the show where we talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, with a little bit of common sense mixed into that as well with structural analysis. Now, I'm your host and guide, Dr. Nicole Rawls, anthropologist, astrologer, artist, and dreamer. And here we do astrology my way, grounded in the body, tied to spirit, and connected to the world we're living in. So every Wednesday, we check into the chaos that we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to create, to move, to burn, or to build? So again, this week we're talking about Venus and Aries. And in doing so, we're going to be talking about fire, creativity, resistance, and what it means to take those dreams and bring them into reality, because there is the fire that is there to ignite us into action. Okay. So let's get into it this week. We're going to start with the weekly forecast, go into a little astrology 101, and then end with some yapping with the stars to figure out what does all of these transits make sense for us this week. Before I begin, if you're new to here joining me and you kind of want to figure out what I'm about, it's good to know that when I'm looking at the forecast and reading the astrology chart, I do so through a Western tropical whole signs lens and perspective. So that is how I set the chart, but I combine both traditional and modern understandings of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, keeping traditional rulership, but bringing the outer planets in for a structural analysis. So again, this is anthropology and astrology my way through a Black queer lens. Okay. So what's going on this week, y'all? So last week, if you joined me, and I recommend, even though the weekly forecasts are weekly, the themes that are coming out of them do build upon one another. So if you ever just wanted to go back and listen to a past transit, the messages still should resonate a bit, because the way in which I work with the cosmos is that it gives prompts and guides to help us understand how to weave the story of what is going on with and to us with the help from the cosmos, okay, with the help from the planets, stars, and zodiacs. So that's a way to kind of work with and go back and engage with previous content, okay? So last week, we kind of ended that week with the new moon in Taurus, right? And that new moon in Taurus was in a conversation, a tense conversation with Mars in Leo opposite Pluto in Aquarius. So we had a T-square forming in the sky. Really a grand, really, if you bring Lilith into the conversation, because Lilith was there in Scorpio, it really was a grand cross, okay? But let's focus on Mars, Pluto in the Taurus, the new moon. And in that new moon, we were really being asked to figure out what we are planting and why. Right? Because Taurus is about the body. It is about the food, infrastructure, the kind of ways that we make a living, the ground itself, soil. And since the soil that we are on, we don't have a good relationship with, and we're seeing infrastructure itself, especially in the US, start to crack, then if we believe the materiality of our existence, if we believe our reality and understand that we are at a tension right now between structures of power and the collective, then how do we take back our power and understand that either it's the state or us kind of doing the showdown? So where do we find our feet so that we can understand how to satiate our hunger? And if we don't know what we're hungry for, we're just going to be fed these things that we are just supposed to take, but it never actually satiates. And so that idea of what are we hungry for really translates well into this week, as we see Venus making her way out of Pisces finally and moving into the fire starter of Aries. This happens April 30th. So Venus moves into Aries. Now, for the past few weeks, Venus has been in Pisces. And we talked about this the last 2 weeks actually on the show. And she was in Aries a while ago, retrograded back to Pisces, and is slowly making her way back into Aries. Now, during this time, she has met the North Node, she hung out with Neptune, and was in a conversation with Saturn for a good 2 weeks. So as I said, the last 2 weeks, Venus has been maturing, has been growing up, as has Saturn. And so we'll talk about Saturn later on in the month of May, because Saturn will also make its way into Aries, I think around May 24th. But before then, we have had Neptune, who's already in Aries, talked about that last week, and now we're going to have Venus. So we are taking the kind of dreams, the kind of concepts, the ideas, the visions, the belief systems that we have around Venetian themes like love, money, relationships, justice, pleasure, right, and the like. And we're being asked to mature and actually figure out and know what we want. Because once we know what we want, by leaving behind what we no longer serves us, by allowing ourselves to surrender, right, instead of forcing, because it's in the deep waters of Pisces. Pisces is about surrender. It's about escapism. It's about the kind of nebulousness of the stories that we are told, in which we try to find a footing on. It's origin stories. All of these kind of creations and the ways we create and why we create. This was reminding us that our imaginations really do matter, because if we don't imagine a future, all we will do is repeat, reproduce, be stuck in the muck of what we are already in. So this is also about us figuring out, again, how we take our authority back. Saturn is really going to be loud about this later on in May, but this has been a continuous conversation as Saturn finishes its stint in the sign of the deep waters in Pisces. So before Saturn meets Aries, Venus meets Aries. And on the 30th, when Venus meets Aries, this is bringing us clarity. So previously, Venus has been able to do the washing through water, the Pisces being the feet. And last week I talked about how it's really good, and especially because of all that Piscean energy, for folks to do foot baths as a way to feel your feet, ground in the materiality of your existence. And remember, you got a body. And ask the body to be a part of the conversation. Again, new moon in Taurus. Can we have a new relationship with the materiality of our existence? Because if we know what we need and are hungry for, then this ignites love, and we figure out then what we are truly fighting for. And that was the conversation Mars in Cancer was having with us for a very long time, forcing us to slow down and reflect and get in our feelings, because the feelings do matter. Our feelings talk to us. It reminds us that our bodies, this thing that holds our spirit, right, is a sentient being that does communicate. It communicates through emotions and feelings. But since structurally, right, and this is very much in patriarchal societies that we have seen recorded over and over again, the use of the weaponization of emotions is somehow feminized and therefore not as quote unquote rational or therefore serious, has really led to a disassociation of humans from our bodies in these capitalistic systems, which means that we don't know how to listen and talk to ourselves. So now that we've done all these endings and had to sit in these kind of harsh realities, and the outer planets are changing signs, so change is here, the inner planets are reminding us that as these structures of society change, so do we. We must change too. So Venus has ended a cycle that it has started, right? Because when any planet goes through the zodiac sign, it's completed its cycle. Venus has completed its cycle. We have now been washed in the deep waters with the North Node saying it's time to meet a new kind of destiny, a new fate that we do not know yet, but we must kind of imagine and move toward with faith, Pisces being faith, right? And then Saturn coming there and saying it's time to mature. Now that we kind of figured it out and dreamt and stuff, Venus and Aries is saying now, put it into action, right? And so we can charge ahead once we have grounded in the feet with clarity. And this is the purpose of fire, right? So fire cleanses. When we don't allow fire to burn something up, when we understand the functionality of the element of fire, right? It takes away what needs to be taken away, leaving fertile ground so that new soil is there for something new to grow. So what needs to be burned right now? What do you need to ignite? when it comes to love and money and relationships and justice and pleasure, right? So that you are enacting, you are creating and not just imagining. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation as Aries becomes more activated, with Saturn making its way there in the sign later on. But with Venus making its debut first, and then it will eventually meet Neptune a couple of days later. We'll talk about that in a minute, right? We are being asked to lead with our love. Venus is love, but love through fire. This is a way to understand the beginning of this transit that starts April 30th. Now, at the same time, April 30th, the moon is was going to be in Gemini. And so for April 30th through March 6th, we have the moon making its way from Gemini and ending in the sign of Virgo on that Tuesday. So in this time period that we're talking about, Mercury is kind of buttressing our emotional kind of engagement with the transits themselves, starting with the mind and ending with the body. So this is really a kind of transitory period from this Wednesday to Wednesday time of us being lit up, of us coming alive, of coming on, and not just the mind, but the body. And this is especially important because you've got Jupiter and Gemini, which is bringing an abundance of information, right? We are being inundated with all kinds of information. Every damn day, Trump got a new executive order. Why? Because it's an abundance of information. It's chaos through information dump. So in order for us to be able to decipher and wade through the waters of Gemini type of facts and figures and documents and stuff, we must understand where we're putting our beliefs in. Where do we put our knowing in? Jupiter is the philosopher, is faith itself, is spirituality, right? It is the teacher. It is the one that uses wisdom. So where's your wisdom coming from? And that wisdom, as the moon goes from Gemini into Virgo, will be very clearly shown to us that it has to come not just from the mind, but also from the body. Right? Because again, the South Node is in Virgo, will be there for another 16, 15 months. And so all of us in some way, shape, or form are having to release the kind of ways we have been taught to be critical of ourselves, that we have been taught to feel as if we must prove ourselves through a kind of rigid classification or kind of process system, and move into more of a flow, that Piscean energy of where we put our faith in, how do we create, how do we allow ourselves to sit in the body and allow that to lead us versus turning it off and then trying to dominate over it. So as we are going through this kind of mercurial moon phase during this time, it really does make sense, because we must use our discernment. We must be grounded in our feet, because again, this is a continual conversation, not just a stop start because we are arbitrarily kind of breaking it up in a weekly kind of format to understand what's going on. Think about this as a story, a continuous story that has plots and twists and turns. So what is the story that you are telling, that you are living and also constructing this week going forward? And I would say listen not just to the mind, but listen and lead with the body, okay? Then on May 1st, we have got, it's May Day, right? It's Beltane. It's also International Workers' Rights Day. And I think this is really interesting that Venus makes its way into Aries the day before we are going to be celebrating internationally workers' rights, right? And also the kind of Gaelic celebration of May that welcomes in spring. And so as we see Venus, which Venus is known also as the planet of women, right? A femme of those who are the creators of life itself, makes its way into a Mars-ruled sign of Aries that is about fight, initiation, right? Drive, passion, starting shit, getting shit done, right? There's a way that this kind of, I think we're going to also see this wave of a rise. We've already seeing it now, but we're really going to see this rise of women and those in service industries, because service industry jobs tend to also be feminized within patriarchal societies. We're going to be seeing more workers through these locations, I believe, demanding justice and rights for their work. And this also includes trans rights, okay? Because you got Aries in Venus. You have Aries in a sign in which it's considered to be in detriment. And because it's on that, Aries is opposite Libra. And if you tend to see kind of Venus and Mars in its quote unquote opposite signs, that can indicate and tends to indicate a queering. right? A queering of gender bending in some way, shape, or form. You yourself do not conform to the scripts put upon your body based upon how your body is identified in a gendered way, right? And also you express that gender in ways that may be counter to the norms of society, okay? So we're talking about detriment and exaltation of planets. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, focusing on Venus and Mars. I mentioned this last week, but we got to be careful that we don't put that into a box. Remember, astrology's interpretations is still contextual. I always say this. A sound spiritual practice needs a structural analysis, but that structural analysis needs a cultural context, okay? Spiritual practice, structural analysis, cultural context. That's my trinity. Okay? And so when we understand that, and we can look at astrology then as a system, as a tool to help us kind of understand the societies we in and our relationship to different forms of life, and we take things like essential dignities, like exaltations and detriments, it's got to be in cultural context, y'all. And who does that benefit and why to understand or see it as an exaltation or a detriment or a domicile or, or a fall, right? We have to remember that your body and how it is read by that society structurally will also determine just how much you can express in the ways that expression is accepted or not from that society. Okay. So if you have a chart and you're like, I got a bunch of placements that are in detriment or fall, does this mean that I'm always going to be doomed to not be successful or something? Absolutely not. Okay. It is not that cut and dry. It's contextual. So, and as we see in these transits, even the stars are reminding us that things do change. So what may be considered a exaltation in one context may actually, even though astrologically it might be seen as something woohoo, when you put it into practice, you might run up against the wall, right? Because that might be how that exaltation needs to be expressed in order for you to access that energy. Does that make sense, y'all? If it does make sense, let me know in the show notes. I mean, the comments below, whatever platform you're watching or listening from. And if you want more clarity, just ask the question. I love your questions. It also helps me again be able to know what else to introduce in these weekly Yappin sessions. Okay. So going back to May 1st, though, in Venus and Aries, we are also seeing an ignition, an igniting of fire through love. Because if we love ourselves and one another and understand that to be humans, we need care and support in society. It is not somehow anti-human to be empathetic. It is the essence of what has allowed us as a species to survive over space and time. So if we know that we have to go after that and protect it, and that's what we're fighting for, Venus and Aries is reminding us that we do have to understand that love is not just a passive action, but it's active and it must be initiated. Okay. So then we get to May 2nd. May 2nd, we got Venus and Neptune conjuncted Aries at 1 degree. So again, on April 30th, Venus makes her way into Aries, and then she meets up pretty quickly with Neptune. Now, Neptune is considered the higher octave of Aries. The higher octave of Venus, okay? And so this is really dreaming energy once again. They met back in Pisces around the North Node. And so there was a way that we were being asked to really delve into the imaginations, into the depths of our knowing, into that collective subconscious, to really figure out where we're basing our kind of imaginations, dreams, and origin stories from. So now that Neptune is drying out on land in Aries and fire, and Venus, the sister of Neptune, is hanging out, this really is the question of can you own your dreams and bring them into reality? This is pure dreaming energy. I swear, I most of my business, my work has been talking about strategic dreaming. How do we embody the materiality of our existence so that we can strategically dream? We must make new templates. We must create new templates from learning from the past, and not just reproducing that knowing, but learning from that knowing, embodying it, believing it, and then daring to create not a different way, other ways, third, fourth, fifth, sixth possibilities, not just the opposite. So now with Venus and Neptune conjuncted Aries, we are being asked, right, not to wash ourselves with water, Neptune's already done that. We are being asked to wash ourselves with fire. Okay. And we have got to be able to work with and handle our own fire, our own passion, our own creativity, our own anger and rage. Because if you're not angry right now in some way, shape, or form, right, I don't understand why not. It's infuriating what's happening. We can place blame anywhere we want, but at the end of the day, it's infuriating. And until we harness that energy, we harness that passion, and we don't just use it to come at one another, but to actually make it so that it brings us the clarity. When you are absolutely pissed off, y'all, and that fire is so goddamn high inside of you that all you want, you actually feel yourself burning up. When you allow it to just burn, just allow it to come up and come over and then die back down, what it does is that fire ignites something telling you something ain't right, and then it is providing the space for you to discern what the hell is not right. So that fire's got to burn, and then once it's burned enough and it's calmed down, you can now see. Now there is clarity. That is what we're being asked to engage with now, okay? Because we already know the state gonna do it. That opposition we had last week, right, is still lingering about, and we already know the state's going to do it. Again, this man, Trump, is constantly bringing out new executive orders, seeing what will stick, seeing how much he can wear us down, but also how much he can bully his way into claiming the authority that he can only have if we give it to him. So whose origin stories do you believe in? Whose perspective are you using to analyze the current moment? And do you believe you? Is your body a part of that conversation, or are you disassociating in order to go into the nether realms of technology and social media and the like? We're going to talk about that with this Pluto retrograde in a second. Allowing yourself to do that so that you become a vessel that can be used and manipulated by power versus taking that power back. That was that whole point of these planets being in Pisces for so long, y'all. You got to get down into what faith is. I don't really care what faith you have, but where is your faith lying into? Does that faith rely upon you giving up your authority to an external being? Or does that faith require you to bring that authority back in so that you understand that you have the authority, what people might call the God in you, right? So with Aries energy now being so active, Neptune really setting the stage, because Neptune's saying it's time to air out all of this shit that y'all have been buying into, because who are you really going to allow to lead or not? This is a time of the false prophets coming out in full force, because it's also the time of the collective learning and needing to understand that we need to figure out what our discernment is and who and what and why we are platforming certain people over others, okay? We're going to get into that in a minute. But going back to this Venus and Neptune in conjunction, right? What we're to remember something too, we both have Venus and Neptune, the cardinal sign of Aries. And so again, it's a time to ignite and begin to create new stories that will lead us into new ways of doing things collectively. This is what I would call the quote unquote feminine rising, once again, to take back what was stolen, our imaginations, our creativity, and our dreams of what is possible based on what we have been told where we come from. Okay, this is important. The Colonial Project. So for some of y'all who don't know me, I'm an anthropologist by training. And so my background is in looking at what does it mean to be human. And I do that through the ways in which the human was co-opted through the Colonial Project. So my first master's was focused more on forensics, biological, skeletal analysis. And I worked with actual material remains. I worked with human remains both at the Smithsonian, Natural History Museum, Tennessee Knoxville's Body Farm. My master's was out of Louisiana State's FACES lab under Mary Mannheim. And so there, a lot of the work I was doing was looking at the ways that our bodies have literally been commodified, right? Broken down into studying, but also how race has been inscribed in the body, so that when we're trying to identify bones for police and the like for forensics cases, that is still very contextual, because how we identify difference through the body is through this kind of biological way we call race. Now, from from there, that is what led me my PhD to going to more sociocultural legal anthropology, in which I was looking at then what is the relationship between race and the state by looking at the ways that Black, Asian, and minority ethnic organizations in the UK had access to or were denied their rights as citizens of the UK. You might be asking why did I go to the UK? Because I wanted to look at where our construct of race in the US origins came from. Origin stories again, right? Big person on origin stories. In the US, the US American origin story of our differences and where we come from and how we have created this kind of racial capitalistic hierarchy is directly coming out of the British imagination and the ways in which it reinscribed its society based on class. Okay. And that's a really kind of condensed a way to talk about my work. But the whole point of that was I was looking at this idea, right, of what does it mean to be human and how the colonial project completely took that by taking away our imagination, by taking away the location of understanding of where we come from. This is the beginning of the slave trade. So when they took people who they then made into Black bodies that then became enslaved, right? One of the ways that they did that was through these kind of ritualized processes. Enslaved peoples were told to walk around a tree so that there was a way they were severing the tie with their land, their ancestors, and where they came from. Okay? Because when you can control a people's mind by taking their ancestors and their land, you can then feed back to them an idea that they came from quote unquote nothing, so therefore they need you. Does that shit ring true? Who told you that, and is it true? Okay. And so this is what we're seeing, this kind of idea, the quote unquote feminine. It's this idea of taking back from these very patriarchal societies our ability to create our own realities. Okay. So then what do you dare to dream? And then what will you need to do? What do you need to actually do to start to bring those dreams into reality? And once again, when Saturn moves here later this month, Neptune will be balanced out by that Saturnian energy of being able to bring discipline and structure and a kind of logic to the ways in which you are creating. And so again, this is where I say the universe is co-conspiring with us if we allow ourselves to work with this energy, because we're not just being asked to create in another vacuum and kind of again go delulu with Neptune and Aries with no checks. We are getting Saturn for the first 2 years, giving us the ability and the time to construct a new set of structures and rituals and routines that will allow us not to just dream and imagine, but actually do something to make that shit reality. And we are seeing this right now, y'all, with the resurgence of a lot of the cultural workers that are emerging in entertainment and movies and the like. We're already seeing this. And I think the latest movie we're seeing this with is Sinners. I still got to see the movie. I've been watching a lot of Ryan's and Michael B. Jordan, Ryan Coogler's and Michael B. Jordan's interviews about it. And it's fascinating because it's such energy. It's such Neptune and Aries energy that is so needed coming out of the end of the Neptune, Saturn, Venus kind of conjunction in Pisces. And it makes me excited for what could be possible when we allow ourselves to dream and then allow those dreams to lead us to do things that we know are right for us instead of performing and doing the scripts that we are told to do that we know won't work for those of us who don't occupy the norm. Right? So this energy is really giving us permission. Now, after that, on May 4th, Pluto stations retrograde in Aquarius at 3 degrees. And this is the first Pluto retrograde that we're going to get fully only in Aquarius. And this is the first time we're going to experience this in our lifetime because Pluto takes so long to transit. Now, Pluto's going to be retrograde until October 14th in Aquarius, making its way to 1 degree. And then again, moving forward. Now, planets retrograde all the time. All right. So the outer planets retrograde once a year. This is not something to fearmonger or think, oh my God, what does this mean? It just means that the planets are doing what they do. They bring forward things and then there's time for review. Again, there's a cycle to stuff. This idea that you're supposed to just keep creating and going and doing and doing and doing and never reflecting is why we have such shit in society right now that doesn't work, right? You must bring things out. You must allow things to kind of grow and breathe, but then you have to reflect and review. And this is what this Pluto retrograde is going to be asking us to do, to reflect and review, but of what? Of us, because Pluto is the planet of death and transformation. Okay, and it transforms through death and it transforms through death and rebirth. Excuse me. Okay, all the outer planets again do transformation. They just do it in different ways. Pluto will require you to die, metaphorically, sometimes physically, so that you can be reborn. And so Pluto in Aquarius is going to be asking us as a collective what needs to die within us collectively, right? And what responsibility do we need to take in terms of, again, who we have given our authority up to, who we platform, and how we can so quickly give a platform to somebody and then take it away, but then take no responsibility or accountability for the fact that we gave permission for these people to be there or not, right? So, where do we take responsibility again for who we platform? Who and what do we give our authority up to? At the same time, Pluto is going to be sextile Venus in Aries as it's starting to make its way retrograde, which means it'll also be in a conversation with Neptune. So, again, this is going to be asking us collectively to reflect and refine how we engage in pushback and what it means to initiate as a collective via the self leading, because Aries is the self. So, who's leading when you are with people, right? You? Or are you conforming to what the group says because you don't want to make waves, you don't want to stand out, you don't want to be cringe, right? Fuck a cringe, try to live. Honestly, fuck don't want to be cringe. You better try to live. And living is not easy. Living is not some kind of set scripts of roles you're supposed to play. Because guess what, y'all? We've been doing that. We've been playing roles and scripts. We've been told to not color outside certain lines. And how has that really worked for us? Please don't think that you going back into a box is somehow going to save you from this authoritarian takeover. It is not. It is not, but it will get you to become a very good vessel and become the new surveillance for the state. So you got to know where your feet are, y'all. You got to know yourself. And this retrograde is going to be one that is going to kind of take the collective through a reckoning of reality making, because it is up to us what comes next. The state only has authority if we give it up. If we take it back and bring it into the self, bring it into us, and we realize and understand what we're hungry for, what'll satiate it, right? And what we then are going to go to fight for. What are we fighting for? What are we going to go to war for? Then that's a whole different way that we engage with the state. It is not passive, it is active. So we are being asked to be active right now. And part of that activeness is not just this, again, this one-way fight. Part of the active is embodiment and reflecting. And this will be really evident once we get to May 6th, because then we're going to have Mercury conjunct Chiron in Aries. That'll be sextile Jupiter in Gemini. So earlier I talked about the moon going from Gemini to Virgo in this kind of time frame. So we're again mercurial, but Mercury is also actively a part of this conversation later in the week, because it's been in Aries. It was in Pisces as well, retrograde around the same time as Venus too, but it moves faster. So it's a little bit further into Aries, but it's going to come up to the dwarf planet that is our wombs, the wounded healer. Okay. And so this time is a way to express yourself as a means to heal the self. Do you know who you are? Right? Jupiter and Gemini, once again, like I said earlier, is really an abundance of information. Jupiter doesn't necessarily love being in Gemini, but I am glad he is here at this time, because it is showing us the cracks in the foundations of our knowledge in the society, of our intelligence in society, in the ways we understand knowledge and intelligence in said society. And in the US, we are anti-intellectual, have been for a very long time, but we are now seeing the consequences of having a state that state-sanctioned anti-intellectualism in one way, shape, or form. So who and what do you believe and why? Right? Again, this is this kind of of the ways that we have to see how we can be our own worst enemy when we internalize information that is thrown at us that we don't allow ourselves to decipher and discern. So again, who told you that and is that true is a really for me, a good question to constantly refer back to when you feel you're battling with yourself and you get the shoulds and the could-haves that are coming through. Is that your voice? Or is it the voices that you have been trained to rely upon first to keep you disciplined? So, what happens if we release the hold criticalness has in our imaginations? Again, the South Node in Virgo is here for all of us to kind of explore this. If we release the hold criticalness has in our imaginations and learn to work with our discernment to filter the thoughts that come to all of us, then what the hell could we not only dream, but bring into reality? Again, this is dreaming energy. Okay? You can't dream a new world if you're still mentally beating yourself up with the old tools. That is what Mercury is going to be reminding us toward the end of this astrological week, okay? And so we're starting with Aries, Venus and Aries, and we're ending still in Aries, but with Mercury conjunct Chiron. And so with all of this kind of weak energy, right? This week's energy, excuse me, we're really talking a lot about essential dignities. And so let's get into a little astrology 101. Now, essential dignities are essentially the ways that planets express themselves, and depending upon the sign they're in, will determine how easily or not easily, I should say, they can express that energy. Okay. And so when we are understanding them, each planet has a planet that they're at home in, a planet that they are in detriment in, a planet that they are in exalted in, so they really can't access it at a higher level, or a planet that they're in fall in which it's really, really hard. Okay. Now, these kind of associations are long standing, and they are coming out of different cultural contexts. Okay. But I've talked about this for a while. We do have to be careful that when we're talking about things like a Mars in Cancer or Venus in Aries, to not use superficial understandings of those placements and those transits to understand current moments, because you're going to do a disservice to what those planets in those signs and those transits are trying to teach us about the complexities of being human and living in these structures of society. And this is what we've really been seeing for me this year in particular, with Mars being in Cancer, which Mars in Cancer is considered at a fall. And now with Venus being in Aries, Venus in Aries is considered to be in detriment. Okay. And this is interesting because Venus is in detriment when it's in Scorpio or Aries, and Mars is in detriment when it is in Libra or Taurus. So they're in detriment when they're in the other person's or the other planet's home signs. But we got to think about this as a partnership between Mars and Venus, between our love and our passion, between our beauty and our drive, between our understandings of justice and love and how we enforce justice and how we show love. Venus and Mars are in a relationship. They're a part of the inner planets, along with the Sun, Moon, and Mercury. They're the most personal planets. They are the ones that help us understand and express a sense of self. And so in this present moment, we are seeing the power of understanding how Mars has to truly get comfortable in its emotions to understand the importance and power of Cancer, of mothering, of nurturing, of care. Because if we don't have nurturing and care as a foundation, then all we will do is go to war. And Mars is a strategist. Mars strategizes, and there's no cost benefit analysis to constantly go to war. Even in its sign of Aries, Aries, once it's mature, is a general, not just a soldier. You know damn well that going to war costs more. It'll cost money, cost lives, cost time. So diplomacy is something that actually can be harder to do, but it has a more sustainable future. So even when we're talking about Mars and say Libra as a detriment, how is that a detriment when cooperation and diplomacy is something that requires a hell of a lot of balance, a lot of charisma, a lot of charm, a lot of knowing, a lot of the ability to use different types of senses to essentially turn other people on to your ideas? It's time, it's relationship building. But if you live in societies and structures that only know force, that understand quote unquote progress as being through the knife, through the sword, through the bullet, through bullying, through the commodification of other people's land and knowledge and ancestors and reinscribing it through your lens and then calling that the universal understanding of knowledge by your idea of science, right? Then of course you would see diplomacy, nurturing, care, and those things that remind people that there is more to life than just consumption and consumerism and individualism. Then your ability to maintain power over that society diminishes, right? So I think Mars is reminding us of that. I've said this for a long time. I'm gonna keep saying it. I got a Mars in Cancer natally, and again, learning that placement as also my chart ruler, and I'm a Scorpio rising. Uranus conjunct my ascendant, trine my Mars in the ninth house at 22 degrees. Okay. Listen, I understand emotions be emotioning. The emotions taking over. But that's the thing. We have to learn how to work with our emotions because we're not taught how to work with them. We are taught to suppress them. We are taught to demonize them. We are taught to judge them. We are taught, and that judgment usually is through a negative lens, right? Disciplining us to conform. Then we tend to then revolt against ourselves, as I said earlier. And so again, right now we got Mars he's in Leo, but in Cancer laying those foundations, because since we're getting a better idea of what we really do need, again, Taurus moon, what are you hungry for? Venus in Aries is saying, okay, baby, love requires action. Love is an element. Love is fire. And so Venus in Aries, right, to me, in this moment as a transit, like I said earlier, is asking us to ignite, to bring our dreams into reality, to stand up for what the fuck we actually say we stand for. Do you know what you stand for? Do you know what you stand for? And are you willing to stand up for it? Okay. That to me is powerful. But in a patriarchal society that again needs us to give up our labor to it, and therefore needs to have a hierarchy even within the family. Okay, so we must have the patriarch above the matriarch, who's above the children, right? Everything is property below the patriarch. To have Venus, the planet of love, the planet of what we call women, the feminine, right? Beauty, glamour, and the like, to have some power, well, you got to put that fire out. Right. We got to put that fire out. This is a lot of the work of when you read people like Foucault. I'm not a huge Foucault fan, okay? I'm just not. I've had to read Foucault a lot, but I'm just not a huge fan. I think there's other theorists that that get to it as well. But I'm using him because he does talk a lot about Patola talks a lot about the prison and the sane asylum, right, and this idea of madness. So does Fanon. And so when you look at Fanon speaking about this idea of the psychosocial and madness and the idea of insanity and insanity, right? And he's taking it through a Lacanian lens. It's really the psychoanalysis of the ways that our epidermal nature, our materiality, our skin, right, becomes a literal barrier that ignites a psychosis because of the associations of it. And then we see Foucault talking about the gendering of that, especially because once people were pushing back against power, women, folks with disabilities, black folks, brown folks, people who were racialized outside of a white male, able-bodied gaze, they were considered to be insane. Enslaved people who wanted to get free, they literally had a whole ass diagnosis saying that they were mad because why would they want to free themselves from their benevolent owners? Venus in Aries is saying, fuck all that. Be mad. Be mad. And if that requires you being labeled as mad, that is because your fire is telling you that you can no longer sit in the confines of what society is telling you is sane. The shit is not, if this is sanity, I'd rather be mad. And I'm not saying that in an ableist way. Okay. I really am not. Please understand the context of what I'm talking about. So when we're talking about essential dignities, I really want y'all to keep that in mind. Put it in a cultural context. who would be dignified and who would be in detriment if they embody these kind of traits, these elements in a particular space, and what happens if we kind of shifted that a bit to have us think of a different template, a different way, a different lens to engage in the chaos that we call society right now. Okay, so let me know if that makes sense, y'all. If you got any questions about that, shoot me down again in the comments. And if you're on my Patreon, we'll be going over this in future divination study sessions. So over there in the Patreon, y'all, I recommend if you want to learn more with me, dream more with me, and get more into kind of life, land, and spirit, I do offer divination study sessions once a month. We'll be doing actually going into twice a month, in which we're breaking down astrology right now. But from there, we'll also be going into other divination systems, because what I want folks who are working with me to do eventually is to create their own kind of tools, whether that be cards or trinkets that we call bones, or getting more familiar with the astrology chart or a combination of that. It's a space in which I'm working with folks to help them be able to work with both with spirit via divination and the mundane, their experiences and the critical analysis to create their own tools. Okay, so if you're interested in that, you can see how to join the Patreon below in the show notes. All right. So let's get to yapping already. We've been talking for a while, but what does all of this mean for this week as a continuous story that we are all a part of as we're in this rapid changing times as the outer planets are changing signs over the next 2 years? Well, I say we are in the time of the rise of the cultural worker, okay? This is what these transits to me mean this week, right? We are in the time of the rise of the cultural worker, and it is time to create. We got to create through what? Through love. But as I said earlier, love is fire. So Venus is the embodiment of love. And if love is fire, if love is an element, then love is what powers the revolution. That's the thing. And Venus being in Aries, Aries, who is the warrior, goes from the soldier to the general, who understands and knows war, knows drive, knows passion through strategy, right? We are learning that sweetness comes, the sweetness of life comes once you've ignited it. So again, in a different way, what are you fighting for? This is the other side of the lesson that we started when Mars was in Cancer. So again, Mars and Venus set the foundation of how we understand our humanity via passions, relationships, drive, and pleasure. And so the switching of these rulerships of these planets at this time, when the outer planets are also changing signs, signals that we need to rethink the ways we do things in those areas of life, flipping the ways we engage with and understand love and war. We got to flip it, right? So we got outer planets changing society. So that means society is going from earth and water to air and fire. This shit's going to go quick, it's going to go high, and it's going to go fast. So do we know where our feet are? So then we have to do things differently. So we got these planets of war and love, of passion and drive, again, flipped in their signs. It's showing us, it's telling us, it's giving us the permission to do things differently, right? You got to flip down, swing, and then reverse it, right? This is Missy. You got to flip it. Old school, early 2000s remix. Make something new. So what we're also then coming off of this new moon in Taurus with this Venus in Aries, comfort and pleasure are not the same. As we have been fed comfort via hard work and labor so that you disassociate from the body and you keep working for a success, even though the story of that success keeps revealing itself to be a fantasy and lie because the goalpost keeps moving. So who do you believe? You, your experiences, your body, the fact that it's in need of things that it cannot meet? Or do you keep believing the fool in power who is telling you that they have the best vision going forward, even as everything is crumbling around you and the shit don't make any sense, but because you're giving your authority up to that, up to it, up to him, you have now said that you will not believe you. You have dehumanized yourself. Why do that? Why dehumanize yourself? Don't give these fools nothing else that they don't deserve. They have already taken enough. If we understand the colonial project as a thief and a liar, and we believe it's a thief and a liar, and that's all it knows how to do, then what do you do with the thief and the liar? You believe it and you got to take your shit back, right? Venus and Aries, take it back. but through love, through fire. Wash your head in fire. And we are seeing this right now because if we don't wash our heads in fire to get clarity, it will continuously burn us up. And we are seeing this kind of forceful, blatant forceful leading from the Trump administration right now. It's a continuation of last week. And he's just continued with the executive orders, with the tariffs, and now he is making it so that the police state will be a real police state, giving the police locally back power. But again, as he's dismantling these structures of government while also requiring that there's more oversight in order to ensure that what he's dismantled is being followed through, if you don't have the resources to follow through with what you are ordering, then we will be left in chaos. What he's requiring, what he's actually hoping, whether it's verbal or not, is that we will do it to ourselves. We were self-surveillance, and we will become the new surveillors of ourselves and one another in this kind of dystopian future. So this is why the imagination matters so much again, and why these stories matter, because we have been fed for so long, and I talked about this last week, through media, through these movies, this very rigid dystopian future that only sees a future that has humans in conflict with one another, fighting and or being chased by zombies. Once they finish being chased by zombies, they got to then fight off the human. It's a very violent, very, quite frankly, white patriarchal understanding of a future in which there's always a patriarch who's violently in charge. But that's only one future possibility, y'all. And we have plenty of other ways to create new futures. And we've actually seen the templates, right? If we remember at various times, just in the US itself, but we've had blackouts, when there's been blizzards, when there's been natural disasters in which we knew the state was not going to do a goddamn thing, we have seen people help each other out. I remember when I was married to my ex, and his people live in the country in Michigan, and I remember this. They all had, you know how folks will buy up land and build their own houses and stuff. So that's what his people did. And one of the neighbors that was just like kind of across the street had a fire, and the whole house got burnt up. Like it was crazy. Like they saw it and they nothing do about it. And because they're in the goddamn country, by the time the fire got there, excuse me, by the time the fire folks got there, it was gone. So my ex-sister-in-law arranged with everybody in the community through her church and through network she had, because she was also a teacher, a former teacher, to ensure that that family had everything they needed to make it through the winter while they were going to be rebuilding, right? And I don't care for my ex-in-laws. I'm very frank with you, or that family at all. But I did have a lot of respect for that. And I had a lot of respect for her for that, right? Because this idea that you're going to be individual and, bootstrapping it, and you're going to have all your bunker down, and you're going to, all those goddamn shows that we were been inundated with about the preppers and stuff. All of that's a fantasy, because at the end of the day, you're still going to have to come out of that bunker and interact with other people. You're going to need other people in some way, shape, or form. So then what is the future that we're creating in which that is the reality? Not this dystopian, anti-empathy, top-down things. Because this Pluto retrograde is also going to show us that the technology that we are giving our authority up to ain't it either, y'all. ChatGPT is not your new spiritual advisor. It is a tool. It is a literal machine tool that you have to train. But how many of y'all are used to training people? And I really do mean that, not in a judgmental way. Stop the judgment. Just ask yourself, have you been trained to train something else? Do you even know the kind of questions that you can ask so that you are not just getting answers that you want to hear? Do you know how to vet the information? Half the damn shit, when you put it into these AI different formats, will give you wrong information. But because we have been taught to give our authority up to something external, whether it be a god, a state, a president, a pastor, whoever it is, when the next new technology emerges, which is this AI, the promise of AI, we're not really gotten into AI, we're still machine learning, right? You give it up to that too. So Pluto retrograde is going to ask, who do you give your authority up to and why? What's the collective responsibility to actually own what we say we want to create? And this is also ancestral. because Pluto is the lord of the underworld, as I said before, ushering in the collective dead. And the dead that are being ushered in now, I truly believe are asking us to stop just speaking their names and quoting them and not learning from them. If I hear Fred Hampton's name one more time, that was a boy. He was 21 years old when he was murdered by the damn state. No offense, he hadn't even hit his goddamn Jupiter return. At that point, he barely hit a nodal return, right? Like we're ascribing these fantasies on historical figures who we have not humanized, therefore dehumanizing the figures we are saying we are looking up to in order to what? Claim our humanity. No, learn from them. Stop repeating what they went through. They did not die for us to be complacent right now. Stop calling down the dead if we're not going to honor them. And that is another lesson that we're learning right now, because it's fire, y'all. It's fire. Got to wash your head with fire so you gain clarity. And as we wash our heads, who we call down needs to be reassessed, because we need to call down the ones who know something before the colonial, but also believe these fools who we are truly up against. So the templates and the tools that we use to push back are going to have to be different. They're going to have to not just be, and again, in the physical fight. It's got to be claiming in the ephemeral, in the sacred, in the imagination, the things that they initially took in order to root themselves in the mundane. Sacred and mundane, Pluto and Aquarius, Venus and Aries, right? Bringing the dreams into reality. And so this is where we are really seeing that we got to resist through pleasure. I said it, we got to resist through pleasure. The music, the stories, the body. This is the rise of the cultural worker as an archetype of what we need to push back and move the conversation and action on what revolution is. So with Mars was in Cancer and all that Piscean energy before, we had to cleanse our feet with water for grounding. And now that we have Mars in Leo, Venus and Aries, all this Aries energy with that Leo activated, we have got to feel. Because you know who's the most emotional signs, y'all? It is not water signs, it is fire signs. And you're talking to a Leo sun right here, okay? It is the Leo, not Leo, fire. Fire is passion. Fire is drive. Fire is creativity, all right? And so what does it mean when I say to wash your head in fire? You have to allow yourself to sit in your body and feel. Feel the fire of tiredness. Feel the exhaustion of surviving in a system that tells you that this is the only way to live. Believe your feelings and allow that to ignite the fire in you even more so that you sit in the uncomfortableness of the reality we are all subjected to. And so then in order for us to do this, right, this kind of mirror reflection that Pluto is going to be having us do as a collective is really asking us whose authority have we given up to these false prophets? Because there are false prophets here, right? From the ones in the pulpit to those in the seats of government and corporate powers to the patriarch at home. For too long, we've been fed the lie that power must be brutal, top down, and through the lens of the patriarch that latched on to Christianity and then later whiteness. And here's the thing, whiteness consumed all that shit. They created an entity so good at what it did that it consumed it. And we are seeing the ramifications of that right now. So it's a time to rest that chapter before and let rise another way of being. And this is what Venus and Aries is starting. So we have to learn to work with the fire and not let it work you. So how do you do that? I'm going to give you a little ritual, okay? I do a lot more of this on my Patreon when I have my poetry and stuff, and I give rituals and different practices and prompts and exercises for folks to kind of work with different energies in themselves. So here's one ritual you can do to work with and cleanse your head with fire. Get you a pen and paper, okay, and you give yourself some time. What I want you to do is make a playlist, okay, that is focused on love as fire. 10 songs at least. I work a lot with music if you worked with me before in the past. So you got a playlist that's at least 10 songs deep about love is fire. What I want you to do is I want you to play that while you're writing down what you want, need, and desire. And as you are working with the music and writing, allow the words to flow as you light that page up, but also allow your body to do what it wants to do. If it wants to move, if it wants to lay down, if it wants to dance, whatever it wants, let it do it. Now, when you are done with that, when you are done with that exercise and you've written it all down, okay, I want you to then write what you wrote and then burn it up. Light it on fire. Let it go to the ethers and ask yourself then what comes next. And once you've asked yourself what comes next, allow yourself to tell you and create. Okay? This is what is going to be igniting the fire in you. Create. It's the time of the cultural worker. And so we need folks who understand the importance of culture and that it is culturally specific. We have to break identity. I've talked about this, I think, episode 2, and that we are a time of identity breaking. So who are you and who are your people? And this is where this idea of culture is coming up. So we see again how the state has fed us entertainment in these dystopian futures where humans are only violent and selfish, and we will destroy the earth because of our violence and our selfishness. But I've always said that's a very egotistical view of our future and on this idea of truth. Because what makes us think that we as humans are that powerful that nature won't rise up if she truly feels threatened? And we're seeing that. We've seen it over and over again in history, but we've been definitely seeing that in the present day. From floods to fires to earthquakes and disruptions to quote unquote everyday life, we are being reminded and being humbled as a species. Yet our arrogance of our so-called advancements makes us feel like we are gods on earth, even though we can't get the technology that we use to even operate correctly or smoothly, right? Because even our technologies that are so-called advanced still rely upon the same old elements that sustain life: earth, air, fire, and water. Okay? So let's stop there. Figure out what you're hungry for, what'll satiate it, and then what needs to kind of burn so you get clarity. If you end up doing the ritual, let me know. I'd love to see, or love to hear, how it goes, okay? And as you are kind of engaging with astrology, with astrological forecasts, remember that this is kind of a story that's building, that has twists and turns, starts and stops, reflections, reviews, right? But it's a way for us to kind of check in with something other than ourselves so that we can start to come back into the selves, all right? Now, if you want to see what these outer planet transits have in store for you, you can book with me a Journey to Self reading directly on my website. Again, I love doing astrology readings for folks. We do an hour, a little bit of change together. It's Zoom recorded. And in that hour, we go through the chart, see where your energies are, how it interacted with structures of society, look to see what are some upcoming trends that are happening. And then I look at the chart to see what are some prescriptions that your chart shows that can help alleviate tension points in the chart, okay? But if anything has landed for you, if you're feeling the fire, right, if you're ready to kind of put these new dreams into motion, come hang out with me on Patreon. That's where I share behind the scenes rituals, playlists, different exclusive content videos, wild imaginations, watch parties, dream incubators, divination sessions. It's a place in which I get to experiment and play. So come on and create an experiment with me. All right? Because right now we don't necessarily need more news. We need more dreamers who can build, right? We need more people who can tend to the fires of life and carry that fire through stories and shape culture going forward. So we need the cultural workers to rise, and it starts with us. Okay? All right. Next week, we're talking about a full moon in Scorpio at 22 degrees on the 12th and what is going to come from that. So join me next Wednesday for that forecast. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through our dreamscapes we can bring the futures we say we want into the present. Till next time. I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. Like Michelle sang, the cosmos, where we come from. The light that lit the way for our ancestors in the dark of night, when they had to leave the spaces that tried to steal their breath and life. Reworking, while also learning how to work with the land that was also being worked. A land and people under duress. The trees did not ask if they wanted to participate in such brutal practices. Yet here they were. Here we are. All beholden to a power structure that only knows how to take and never to give, while telling us this is the right way to live. So I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. As Michelle say, the cosmos. Imagine that freedom lied in parable of the sower that sowed the seeds of earth's seed that wanted to bring humans back to the stars, to start again, to start anew. Remember where we come from and who we are. The stars that lit the way, that guide the light. The moon that holds the tides of the waters, our connection to earth and land. As above, so below, yet we don't know, because we have lost the above and the below. So I don't want to be right, I just want to be free, and journey to the cosmos.